The character of Sherlock Holmes first appeared over 130 years ago. While many other characters have been forgotten, Sherlock Holmes remains iconic to this day. He has appeared in plays, radio dramas, television shows, and films. The audio drama you are about to hear is an original Sherlock Holmes story. So, put on your thinking cap and enjoy the show.
Mary, do you want some more champagne?
No, thank you. I haven't finished this glass.
How's the happy couple?
Oh, there you are, Victor. I was wondering where you'd gotten to.
I was wooing the Lady Violet on the terrace. Not very successfully, I'm sorry to say.
Your mother's outdone herself with this party, Victor. It's even more impressive than last time.
Well, I'll tell her that you said that. Entertaining is her pride and joy. Speaking of parties, the wedding's soon, isn't it?
Yes, in 3 months. I'm so excited.
Ah, yes, Charles always was the ladies' man. Getting the prettiest girl in London.
Oh.
I'm the luckiest man in the world.
Charles,
What?
who's that woman?
Woman? What woman?
Over there. She keeps looking over at us, although she's pretending not to.
Who are you looking at? Oh, that's Flora Jones.
Am I supposed to know who that is?
Well, everyone seems to. She's quite the actress. I saw her in Macbeth recently, and she stole the show. I should introduce you.
Oh, please don't, Victor. I always find actors terribly boring.
Maybe I'll try my hand. I am the best-looking man in the place.
Lady Violet hardly seemed to think so.
It's very ungentlemanly of you to kick a fellow when he's down. Maybe I'll have better luck this time. Excuse me.
It's a wretched night out there, Mr. Holmes, make no mistake. I'm soaked through. I wasn't expecting it to rain.
I could have told you it was going to, Mrs. Hudson.
Well, I wish you would have, Mr. Holmes. It's going to take a month of Sundays to dry myself out.
Would you be so kind as to bring me a pot of tea?
Tea? Mr. Holmes, I think it's high time you learned to fix tea yourself.
Leave the expert to their domain, Mrs. Hudson.
And what happened to this room since I left? I straightened up just this morning.
Since Dr. Watson is away on his honeymoon, I took it upon myself to organise some old case files.
If this is what you call organising, Mr. Holmes...
Mrs. Hudson, I distinctly remember discussing tea a moment ago.
You'll have to wait until I get into some dry things.
And would you get the door?
I suppose I so expertly answer the door, there's no reason for you to do that either.
Precisely. Thank you, Mrs. Hudson.
Come right through here, sir.
Dreadful evening, isn't it?
I was just saying that to Mr. Holmes. A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes.
Good evening, sir. I see you had the foresight to carry an umbrella. Take note, Mrs. Hudson.
Mr. Holmes, I am sorry to call so late.
Please don't concern yourself. Will you sit?
Oh, thank you.
And what may I do for you, Mr...
Oh, I'm sorry. Lettering. Charles Lettering. Well, it's rather... You see...
That you're newly married, have recently moved to the countryside, and have also lost your watch. Although the last is of no importance.
Why, you're quite right. But I don't see how you knew.
As for the first, your wedding ring is from Grimble and Fleet, a fashionable but relatively new jeweller. Their work is quite distinctive. As for the country, your clothes obviously suggest it. However, your mustache and demeanour are too urbane, suggesting a man who lives in the country but is accustomed to the city.
What about the watch?
As to that, you reached into your waistcoat pocket when you apologised for coming so late, presumably to glance at the time. You'd forgotten it was gone.
Very impressive. I'm afraid I couldn't tell you a thing about people. At least not anything accurate. You must have a good eye.
It is what one sees and what one puts together. But I think, Mr. Lettering, that you came to tell me something.
Yes. I came to you because... Well, if it was just the one thing that happened, I wouldn't have bothered. But with all the rest...
Perhaps if you could tell me what has happened.
Well, as you already know, I'm recently married. girl of my dreams, really. Everything started out wonderfully. But then I started having these dreams.
Dreams?
Yes. Normally I don't believe in that sort of thing. Warnings and future predictions and all that. But what's happened has caused me to wonder.
Mr. Lettering, if perhaps you could contain yourself to the facts. This preamble is getting us nowhere. Now, if you please.
Oh, of course. I'm sorry. Well, these are recurring nightmares. I was out walking, and I saw a folly. Miniature, Greek temple sort of thing. And there was a palpable feeling of evil. Then, in the folly, I saw a hooded figure standing over something. I got closer, and I saw it was standing over a body. My body. Then, the figure started to come towards me. I tried to run, but couldn't get away. It's the most horrible kind of feeling you only get in a dream. Then I awoke.
And you think these dreams mean something?
Well, I don't know. You see, we recently moved to our home in Surrey. There's a lot of wooded parkland behind the house. My wife and I were doing a bit of exploring. We were in a bit of the woods I hadn't been in. And suddenly it was there. The folly. And there was the same feeling of evil.
And then?
I didn't tell my wife what was happening at the time. I didn't want her worrying. I was rather afraid I was going mad. Then I started getting letters.
Letters?
Yes, threatening letters. Of course, I had to tell Mary, my wife. Then, that only made things worse. She started having odd dreams too, and letters started being addressed to her. She started hearing scratching on the walls and other strange noises in the house. One day, I came back from the village and found her petrified. She'd locked herself in the bedroom, certain that someone had been trying to break into the house. It had been the servant's day out, so she'd been alone, except for Mrs. Brown, our housekeeper. Mrs. Brown, was in the kitchen and didn't hear anything. Frankly, I'm terrified, Mr. Holmes. I'm terrified for me, and even more so for my wife.
These letters, do you have them with you?
Oh, they're here.
Thank you. Mr. Lettering, is there anyone who bears you or your wife a grudge? Anyone you can think of who would want to send you threatening letters?
No, nobody.
You have no theories as to why this might be happening?
I don't know, I tell you. I've racked my brains trying to think.
Besides your wife, have you told anybody about the dreams?
No, of course not. People would think I was mad, wouldn't they? Sometimes I wonder if perhaps the whole thing is some dream, some delusion. But that can't be so.
Very interesting. Mr. Lettering, I will take your case. There are certain points which are of interest. I would be curious to meet your wife. I think it could be illuminating.
I suppose that could be arranged. I could bring her to London. It would be good for her to get away.
Excellent idea.
Perhaps early next week?
The sooner the better.
Well, thank you, Mr. Holmes.
And if you get any more letters, please bring them with you when you return.
Yes, I will. Thank you. I can find my own way out.
Have a good evening, sir. What did you say to him, Mr. Holmes? The man looked like he'd seen a ghost. What have you got there?
I distinctly remember you saying how you had to change from your wet clothes. Yet here you are, still in them.
I got caught up in looking through the post.
Of which there was very little of interest, I suspect. In answer to your question, they are letters. I am watching you from the folly, and you cannot escape. Beware of the folly, you will never be safe. I will get you. The darkness is closing in. Run, but you'll never escape.
I must say, it gives me the creeps.
As I'm sure it was intended to, Mrs. Hudson.
Well, I can't stand around here talking. I must change.
Don't forget about the tea. I'd be most disappointed not to have it.
Charles? Charles? Darling, are you there? Who's there? Charles, where are you? Charles. Charles, where are you? Charles!
Good morning, Mr. Holmes. Here's your breakfast.
Thank you, Mrs. Hudson. Is there anything else?
Are you expecting anyone today, Mr. Holmes?
Is there anyone in particular you're thinking of?
Well, I wondered if you'd ever heard from the gentleman who was here last Thursday.
Mr. Lettering? No. You seem to have taken rather an interest in this.
Well, it was a very strange story.
I thought you were doing more than looking through the post.
Well, I did start out looking through it, but the man's voice did carry.
Naturally. No matter, Mrs. Hudson. I somehow doubt we've heard the last of him.
I do wonder what's behind it all.
Perhaps that's him now.
Oh, for once you're wrong. It's a lady.
Please show her in. What a pity it's too early for the post to have arrived.
Really, Mr. Holmes?
I do hope Mr. Holmes doesn't mind I'm disturbing him so early, but it's an urgent matter.
Of course not. With the amount of disturbance Mr. Holmes causes around here, he'd have no right to complain, even if it were. A lady to see you, Mr. Holmes.
Thank you, Mrs. Hudson. Good morning, Mrs. Lettering.
How did you know who I was?
The wedding ring. It matches the one your husband had.
Yes. I knew he'd come here. That's why I had to come and see you.
Won't you sit down?
Thank you.
Have you had any breakfast? Mrs. Hudson makes an excellent omelette.
Oh, no, thank you. I couldn't eat anything. Mr. Holmes, I had to come and see you because my husband is missing.